Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. My name is Will Figueroa, and I am proud to be your host for another episode of Tiger's Den Live, where we help you stop scratching your way through life and business, that you could really start clawing your way towards the success that you deserve, both in life and business. And I'm joined always by the man who created the Tiger framework, who lives and breathes this Tiger mindset. Paul Routhier, the founder of ClevelandRain.com. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I am great. Good morning. I understand it's Executioner Friday.
Yes, we were speaking a little bit in the pre-show, and I was saying to Paul, you just breathe this. Like this is like everything that you do. In fact, what I actually said was he just vomits execution because this is something that quite frankly, he just has the most experience about. And in going through the rundown, full transparency, I said to him, is there anything else that we haven't spoken about in execution? In the last two episodes that we spoke about specifically regarding execution, we really went deep and have really gone over a bunch of stuff within execution. And and I had asked the question to Paul, and we'll kind of recap and kind of have the discussion from there. I had asked him, is there anything that we haven't spoken about yet? Is there anything that people often take for granted that you don't? And if so, why? And you were speaking about how there's more than just the one piece. Can you dive a little bit more into that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about each individual piece of the framework, and I said, well, it's all interconnected. It's an entire platform of operation for a person, and it's really important to understand that one piece doesn't really coexist without the other. They're all interdependent. Um, and execution, you have to have a great plan to execute on, and you have to build that plan back, and you have to identify resources, because you can't do anything by yourself. There are pieces that you're going to need other people's talents to do, and so now you devise a plan and you put the proper resources in place, figure out who's going to do what, when, where, how, and then help them execute towards your plan. So that's all part of it. Um, so it's really more of a project management operating system, for lack of a better term. And it's kind of interesting because I was doing some training with my assistant. I'm training her on project management the other day, and so we're working in Microsoft Planner to do this. We're dragging around, and she noticed there was a little plan down at the bottom. She goes, "What's that?" And it's like home. It says home on it, right? So it's my household. And she's like, "Can I see that?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You have your wife on task. You've got the yard going. You've got this is going to be done by when? Um, we've got my daughter's graduation party next year, so we've built a
Wow.
project plan around that because we want the yard done, and we know we've got to get certain resources outside to get the yard done. There's certain resources in today's economy that we can't get, right? So one of the things on the list was to remove the rock bed in the front and put it in the back. Well, we can't find a contractor right now, so we had to pivot. And I hauled 10 tons of rock from the front to the back and redid the back, and then put some, because I couldn't find the contractor to do it. And but because we had a plan
Yeah.
and we knew when things needed to get done, and we found a risk, right, to that plan, which was no contractors available. We came up with a contingency, and the contingency was break Paul's back for a weekend, and it'll get done. But ultimately, the project got done because we didn't wait till the last minute. We had a plan. Could you imagine that, how my wife would feel if we just kind of waited till spring and said, okay, let's do the party, and we're going to have the contractors come in and get the yard ready and put the tents in and all that good kind of stuff. We would have made all those phone calls in the spring and found out everybody's booked solid. Won't get the tent. We couldn't get the contractor 9 months ahead of time before winter to get it done. Odds are we're not going to get them in the spring either. And and there's other things we wanted to do, so we needed that done now. But if we didn't sit down and make a plan, then we'd just pick up the phone and we'd find all these problems that we don't know how to do, and the stress level would be like right through here. But
Yeah,
we
through
have a
the
full
roof.
plan. We're executing on that plan, and we're the yard's done. It's ready to go for next year. When the snow comes up, the grass is going to come up, and we've got all the other pieces in place. So
Yeah.
it was kind of funny. She gave me a hard time about having a full project plan for the
Yeah.
household maintenance
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
our maintenance role, and the yard and the party and all the stuff we do. But honestly, my family works from that perspective. We identify resources that we need to get certain things done. My daughter's a great example. She's going to college next year. She hasn't picked out her college, but 2 years ago, we put together a plan for planning what college she's going to go to. And one of the pieces in there was getting her ready to take the SATs and all that stuff. And we identified immediately that neither of us had the time, the inclination, or we've been so far away from school for so long that we couldn't do it. And we identified that as we were planning, and we hired a college coach to work with my daughter so that she could prep for the SATs, um, pick the colleges that she wants based on the criterion she's looking for, someone to schedule those college visits, and ultimately we hop on a plane and go visit those places. But again, we wouldn't have really known that if we waited till this month, which a lot of people are like, who are seniors are like going, okay, we need to fill out FAFSAs
Yeah,
and
now they're
do all this
cramming. Now
stuff,
they're
and they're
cramming. Yeah, yeah,
cramming.
yeah.
And I'm just sitting here going back like, yeah, that sucks, man. I'm sorry. you know, um,
Right.
because it's proper planning. It's thinking ahead. My wife and I really sit down, once a week, once every couple of weeks, and we try to see what's coming or what we want to do. We've got a
Yeah.
couple of other plans for us since my daughter's leaving for college. We've got some things that we want to do for ourselves, and we sit down, we talk about it, and I actually put a task in somewhere to revisit that if it's not like a whole concept yet,
Sure, sure,
and
sure.
we talk about that stuff, and it's some people ask us, you guys are so smooth, as you do things, how do you do that? And it's like proper planning.
Yeah.
Proper planning is the bed of execution. Okay, it's very clear to sit and visualize, have a vision of what you want to accomplish, and then work it backwards, build timelines and task loads, figure out if you have the resources in house, and where you don't have resources in house, identify resources external so that you can get people booked and the timeline, and meet your goal. And that's what execution is. Execution is nothing without planning.
Yeah.
Okay. Um,
It,
dancing a
it
jig, right? So,
right. Well, one of the things that I'm hearing out of all of this, right? We had mentioned before too, one piece of that Tiger framework that doesn't exist without the other, and that what I'm hearing out of all of this is that Tiger as a whole is execution, right? When you put the whole thing together, right? Because you had to be tenacious enough to figure out, okay, in regards to your yard and the bedrock, right? Figuring out, well, if I can't do this, then what else can we do, right? Insert tenacity, right? Okay, great. Well, what if we did blank? There's your inspired thinking or creative thinking that we speak about when it comes to inspiration, right? The generosity, right? Well, how can I give, right? Because it's all for your daughter, right? So you're giving your time, you're giving your resources towards, arguably an asset, right? An investment. Of course, this is your daughter. It's more than just real estate or something else. It's so
Yeah.
much more, and it's so much deeper, right? Which only in turn, much like we spoke about in the last episode, right? When true generosity, really happens, the return on that investment is tenfold, right? And then ultimately you execute, right? And you go ahead and you move that bedrock, but in turn you're also executing the plan. You were able to get ahead of it, far enough that you realize, yeah, you know what, we're not going to get a contractor in time. Let's go ahead and make sure we have this plan in place. And then what do you do afterwards? After you execute, you take that time when your back is shot, and
Well,
and you go back and you rejuvenate, right? You reinvest in yourself so that you can continue with the plan. What I'm hearing is that execution is not only just a single portion of the framework. The Tiger framework is in and of itself execution. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think ultimately that's correct,
Yeah.
because if you could put parentheses around Tiger and put execution underneath of it, because it's all the way across the board.
Yeah.
It is absolute necessity. I talk about resources. The yard thing was interesting, because to have someone come in and do the yard, it would have cost us like 25-30 grand to get this whole thing done. I bought a tractor to do the job, because there's no way I'm going to haul, you know, um, all that rock
Right.
with a wheelbarrow or something like that. So we had the money to do this, but we can't do this, so we reproportion the money to pick up a lawnmower, lawn tractor, whatever you want to call it, and a trailer that goes behind it. And so we bought the resource to do that, since we weren't investing in people to do that. um, and get that done. It's kind of funny. My neighbor came over with he walked down his driveway, came all the way over with a beer in his hand. He's like, "Why the hell are you doing that?"
It's like, have you tried to call a
I looked at him and
contractor?
I goes, I said to him, I said, couldn't find a contractor, man. So go grab
Right.
yourself a shovel and help me out. He's like, nah.
There's some
He
people
was
who
not being
understand.
generous.
Yeah, yeah, I was just gonna say there's some people who understand generosity, and there's some people who are still learning. There's still
Yeah.
opportunities. That's hysterical. Um, my question is, we've spoken about the individual. We've spoken about oftentimes, especially when it comes to execution, the bigger organization in and of itself. How do I make Tiger bigger? At what point do I start maybe even building that team uh, on the foundation of Tiger? Do you follow the rule of three like we've been taught in the 10x community here, or do you have another a way of approaching it? Because like anything, and you mentioned this too in pre-show, right? Like Tiger is great, but you can't possibly grow by yourself. You can't do this by yourself, right? So when do I know it's time to bring in people uh, for the growth of my company and using the Tiger framework in that foundation? What's a good point to bring that in? Because I want to grow, I want to scale, not only as an individual, but as an organization.
Yeah. So ultimately, this really goes to team building, right?
Mm,
And I go back to this vision, values, and mission. Um, that's the key. So if you're feeling, as a small business, if you're an entrepreneur, um, and large companies are doing this. I mean, well, this is starting to become a critical piece of business operations in the enterprise. But mission, vision, values, and really building that out and doing. I worked with a group not too long ago. It took 18 hours for us all to come to mission, vision, values.
wow.
But once we coalesced around that message, it was like a mic drop. Everybody was like, "Oh!" And then when people hear it, they're like, awe. That's what you guys are about. And now you've built yourself a lens. Okay. So
Mm,
you've built yourself a lens to look at your employees through. You've built a lens to look at your partners through. You've built a lens to look at your strategic business partners through. And when you get that alignment, so, a business is like, like a Viking rowboat, right? Big giant Viking ship. All right. You've got like everybody. I shouldn't use the Vikings. I really should use like the Mesopotamians because they had the big oars, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah. There you
Greeks,
go.
right? So you got, so if you can envision that and you can envision, everybody gets on the boat because the captain of the ship doesn't have a direction yet. So everybody's rowing their own way. And that boat just kind of circles. It kind of meanders and circles and goes on. When you build the mission, vision, and values, the captain, the navigator, has a point in the future to look at, a point down the road to look at. And
Mm.
then the oar manager, for lack of a better term, can get everybody, because now he's brought people in to hit the oars who are all aligned with that vision, and those oars start moving together, and then that boat makes movement forward in the direction that wants to go. I always like Monty Python. I think that one of the best things was the Mutual Assurance Company skit comes to mind, where the business office buildings have sails and they're all cruising in a direction. Always that comes to mind. I love that skit. I remember it when I was a kid. I think it was one of the things that brought me into business. Um,
Really?
but well, yeah, because I was in the Navy, and so it all just clicked for me,
It all
But
coalesced.
it all coalesced in a crazy, warped way.
Right.
But um, but ultimately, it is that cohesion that you're building because of the lens you're looking through, and you're bringing the right people in the organization. You're building that resource pool to execute on your plan. So it flows top, middle, bottom, all the way through an organization, because you stop looking at the organization as top, middle, bottom, and you start looking at the organization as a team.
So, and I love that, and I'm reminded of a comment that you were speaking about earlier in regards to teaching your assistant. A lot of these project management kind of rules, right? So you bring people on, and you give them the foundations. I don't want to lose that nugget, because I think there's some real value there in regards to execution. Because if you're not managing the plan, if you're not, to your point, right, if you haven't really created that lens to understand the target, then you're just going to be in that boat going in circles. So what are the things, or one of the basics that you're teaching? Maybe some of the things that we take for granted in project management and execution that you don't, and why?
Well, I think the big thing is well, two things that a lot of people, I won't say, I'd rather say that they miss, as
Sure,
they're building it, right? It's not
sure,
that
sure.
they take it for granted. They just miss that level of detail. And resources are number one. Okay, one of the things that I see organizations do pretty heavily is they don't do a capabilities audit on their
Mm,
people. So, and this is really key, because you need to know what your people are capable of and what they're potentially capable of. Okay. And it's really clear, when you audit their skill set and audit their goal set, right? Not just their skill set, but their goal set. What they can do now and what they want to be able to do is clearly important as you're defining the roles and the tasks that go to reach your vision. When you audit that, then it gives you a clear path of assigning those resources to specific tasks. A lot of times organizations do this on the fly and they misalign the task
I was just going to bring
with
that
the
up. I
person,
was just going to bring that up.
right? So then they cause their own risk. And when I talk about risk is very simply defined as something that's going to get in the way or slow the process down to get to the goal, to your goal. Speaking in project management terms, it'll back the project up, right? If it's in the critical path. And critical path is all the tasks that need to get done that are critical to move the project forward. So that's really key. Second thing is that they do not put enough detail in the task. Okay,
Mm.
a specific task may have subtasks that these particular things need to happen. And as you get going, I know you've worked with checklists and this type of thing. If you forget one thing, it can kind of blow the whole task apart, and then you have to go back and do it. And I'm going to add one more thing.
Please.
All right. And this is key because this is missed all the time. Because each individual, especially in the entrepreneurial area where it's small business, as the project manager, which you may be the owner of the company, you never, ever, ever assign yourself tasks in the critical path. You make sure
Mm.
someone else is doing that. And the key there is because if you are there to pivot and help everybody else get their tasks done. So if you're working on a critical path task and you have to stop to help everybody else do their task, your task is slowing the project down. And
Yeah, now you're at risk.
that's really critical because I have seen this 80% of the time that the critical path is always on, the entrepreneur. And that's a dangerous place because that can slow your projects down.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I've seen this time and time again with some of the Fortune 50 companies that I personally have worked with, where there is just a mismanagement of resources. They haven't done both the skills and goal set assessment, right? Because and that was always my drumbeat. Through my career, I kind of grew into learning and development, teaching, training, and technologies, things of that nature. And one of the things I begged, Paul, when I tell you that I begged for these things in some of the companies that I worked with, was that skills assessment. And the reason being was because you know, I I wouldn't put myself to be this, this high scholar, financial whiz, whatever. But I'm pretty sure, when you see on a P&L, a profit and loss statement, this much revenue, this much loss, and it's just not working out, you can kind of put two and two together that there's going to be some organizational changes here real quick.
Yep, absolutely.
and and one of the things that I absolutely dreamed of genuinely is exactly what you're talking about, is either putting together a team uh, or just an initiative that would save these people's livelihoods, their careers, instead of just putting these people on the chopping block. It's like, well, okay, what are the real needs of the organization, and then what are the skill sets of the people who work here, right? Because if you have supporting systems or supporting departments that maybe they're even operating at a loss, and you don't really need them in the moment, but when times are good and things are flowing, that's when you really need them. I would love to be a part of an organization that, instead of thinking about firing and layoffs, immediately goes back inside, much like what you're talking about, and assesses, okay, what are everyone's goals and what's the current skill set? And instead of laying people off, is a massive reassigning, not resignation or layoff. Because that to me, I've seen in a very small handful of organizations, one of which a few years ago was just bought out by a major Fortune 500 company, that when they were going through really tough times, and this was pre-pandemic, this was maybe 5 or 10 years prior to uh, you know what we just went through with the pandemic. I'll never forget being a part of an assembly line of a major technology company. They had deals with NASA, they had deals with Sony and Apple, and just major, major deals. And they were not doing well. And one of the things that they had done before they even thought about laying people off, because there were people who were in that company, there were generations working in this company. It wasn't just dad, it was the dad and then the daughter, and then the son worked, sales, and then the mom was in logistics, and like really like a generational family company, true through and through, true and true. And the first thing that they did, and I'll never forget this, was exactly what you're talking about, a full skills assessment. What skills do you have? How was your review the previous year? And then what skills do you have? What are you excited about, or what are you trying to achieve? And what are your goals? And I'll never forget that once they had reassigned and moved people within the organization, what ended up happening was arguably miraculous. But it goes to your point about proper planning, understanding true skills, and people's individual goals, getting down to really knowing your team so that you can execute against this mutual, obstacle or goal. Uh, and they did have to cut time for people. However, they did not lay off anyone, and they reassigned a bunch of different departments. And what ended up happening was that people ended up being really happy, although they had been cut time, and their salaries had been cut just because of the time, for obvious reasons. They, I'll never forget. Everyone came back saying, I just feel more fulfilled. I feel more happy coming back into the work. Does it stink that I've lost, a quarter of my salary for a certain time? Yeah. You know what? But I would rather have, a salary cut with a little bit less time, feeling totally fulfilled, with more time with my family, or to even try something else, than to not have a job, to be depressed, to be down and out, and having to start all over again. The idea of just knowing the skill set of your team so that you could then execute accordingly against the plan, I cannot emphasize the dichotomy that I personally have experienced from this medium-sized company. They're doing a few, 10 million, maybe $50 million, to this major, major Fortune 500 company doing billions or trillions of dollars, and just a totally different way of doing things. Why do you think? And I know we spoke about this last time, and maybe it's because of my own lack of understanding, but there seems to be a real disconnect in the bigger companies, or the more revenue that comes in. It's not necessarily big as in number of people, but in total revenue. I feel as though that the more revenue a company makes, for whatever reason, they lose touch. Why is it that seemingly the more successful a company is, the more that they lose that touch? Because this what I'll call medium-sized business, is medium-sized technology business that I was a part of, uh, was so tight knit, not only because of the family integrations, but the people who they hired, their values. They made sure that when they hired people, they knew the type of loyalty and respect that they were going to not only expect but receive as a new hire, and vice versa. Why is it that there's such a disconnect as things begin to grow and the success begins to come in, the revenue grows, EBITDA keeps getting better and better? Why is it that these bigger companies end up more seemingly, yeah, just disconnect, and lose the focus on their people? What is it that they're focusing too much on and not enough of?
Well, I think it's a matter of locus of control and perspective, right?
Mm,
So we talked about this before, where as you get further away from the customer in the chain of business, that you lose the ability to even see the customer. As you get further away from the frontline employee, as you go up, you lose and you're putting walls in between, right? You're, using a mid-level manager, or maybe, or assistant AVP. and you're a VP, or you're at the C level and you've got a VP and AVP and then and then a midline manager. The further away you get from the company's mission, your perspective changes. And I talked to a person a few weeks ago, um, in sales management, and he's C level, and he says, "I manage numbers." I'm like, "Dude, no, you don't.
Wow.
You need to be working with people."
Wow.
Okay, I manage to a number,
Right.
and I'm like, "Okay, so that's the loss right there."
Is
Okay,
it the wrong
because
incentives? Do you think it's because they've incentivized the wrong things?
I think it's a matter of perspective and a matter of mindset and thought.
Mm,
It's really about that, because you work with the people and the numbers come. You don't manage the number, and you get involved in the deals that are happening, and you truly, you have to have a love for that,
yeah.
um, from the sales perspective. But it's the further away from that you get, that you start losing perspective, and you start losing perspective not only from the customer standpoint, but from what your frontline workers are actually dealing with and how they're dealing with it. One of my favorite shows is Undercover Boss, right? When the CEO goes down, he actually finds out what his
Great show.
frontline workers are
Great show.
doing and
Yeah.
how they react and who they are. And, that should be standard operating procedure. Every C-level person should take, a week and work in the pits with with everybody else. It would change their perspective. And not only that, it would enhance their company. But again, that goes to mission, vision, values, right? And if you have alignment all the way down, that perspective doesn't change as much. But the guy who's managing a number isn't working with the mission, vision, and values, or the company doesn't have the mission, vision, and values, and that spectacle to look through, right? So it's really, it's a disconnect. The higher up the mountain you climb, the more you can see, but the less detail you see, right? So, and it's the same from the
Yeah. One of
corporate
the
perspective.
one of the brands that come to mind that do exactly that is Costco. You cannot come into Costco as a manager if you haven't worked the front line, if you haven't done returns, if you haven't sold hot
Yep.
dogs, if you haven't run a cashier. You cannot climb. You cannot just enter into that organization, willy nilly. You're just, you know what I mean, just the
Mhm.
handing in a resume and going through an interview process for a directorship or a VP or even a manager's position if you haven't even picked up a box, at this warehouse, right? They make it a point to almost grow their own. And I think that's what you're speaking to, the need to not only grow your own, but to ensure that as you grow, you stay connected. And and I think that's the real takeaway here for execution is to stay connected, not only to your people, to yourself, to your goals, but so many things to be a part of. And is the reason why one of the things that you're teaching your assistant is in regards to the basics of real project management, right? And by staying connected to the plan, it allows you to more efficiently and effectively execute against that in order to really start clawing your way to success and really taking the steps as you're pouncing on opportunity to to be able to achieve what you're looking for. And I love that. And to me, and to hear it, and the reason why I put so much emphasis on it is because even in my own experience, it's so refreshing to hear. It's refreshing to know that anyone watching this can go over to clevelandrain.com, have that time with you, and really start integrating this tiger framework into a tiger mindset, instilling and installing it as a foundation, right? So whether it's in coaching or whether it's in your, in the bigger organizations that you work with, it's just so refreshing to know that that there is hope in execution, and you could reach out to this man right here, Paul, over at clevelandrain.com. I don't know how else to end it. Is there anything else that
I
that, that comes to mind? Because to me, it, it
Yeah,
it brings hope.
Yeah, I do want to bring this kind of full circle because at the beginning we were talking about the individual and we got into corporate. I'd
Yeah,
love to bring this back to the
sure, sure.
individual because this is key. So if you're a person, an entrepreneur, doing a skills assessment on yourself is critical. Okay, that's one of
Mm,
the, as you're starting a business or building a business, you want to know really from a detailed standpoint what you can do, what you may have to outsource, or what you may need to learn.
right.
And putting that to paper as you're building this, or putting it to, computer as you're building this, and understanding your skill sets so that you don't try to reinvent the wheel, or you don't do things that aren't productive in moving your needle forward, and you hire those out. And of course, money is always a consideration or resource, but does it make sense for you to learn this skill, or does it make sense for you to bring someone else in to accomplish that? And I'll use an example. When we first opened Cleveland Rain, I did a skills assessment on myself, and I'm not a social media person. So I didn't have Facebook. I didn't have, the only thing I had was my LinkedIn profile because that supported my business activities for the past 25 years. And yes, LinkedIn's been around since 2003.
Yeah, don't be
So
surprised, everyone. Don't
don't
be
be
surprised.
surprised. It's been
It's been
that
around for a
frigging long.
while.
So wow, yeah, we actually looked at that the other day. I was like, oh my god, because my assistant asked me, how
That's
long have
true,
you been
yeah.
on LinkedIn? And I'm like, I think I think it's 20 years. And she goes, no, it hasn't been around that long. And we looked it up, and
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh my
It
god, it's
sure
been around
has.
since 2003. It sure has.
Yeah.
Um, so or 15 years, excuse me. So anyway, the point being is I immediately identified that I am not going to be able to learn the social media thing in the way that people use it today, and it's going to take me months to get into this. I identified that, and I said, okay, that part I need to hire out. So I immediately, before I even flipped on the switch, a month before I flipped the switch on, I had a social media assistant, and
Yeah.
she takes care of most of that stuff because I engage with people on social media, but I'm just not building that posting, and that's key to move the needle forward for Cleveland Rain. So as I'm thinking about the skill sets that I don't have, I'm looking at people as I talk to people. I'm looking for people who can fulfill those skill sets and help me. And a lot of that is contracted out, but my needle has moved forward far faster than it would have if I tried to take it all on myself. You cannot do this alone. You have to build a team around yourself of people that can execute.
Love it. Love it, love it. And if you too are looking for that team, if you're looking for someone just like Paul to come in, or Paul himself, head on over to clevelandrain.com so that you too can have the Tiger framework and the Tiger mindset, not only as an individual, but in your business as well. As always, Paul, it's always a pleasure. I love speaking to you about this. I love picking your brain about everything that you've experienced and ultimately what you've created, which is the Tiger framework. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Hope
Bye,
everyone is
everyone.
well. Next time we speak, rejuvenation. Bye, everyone.